of you may know, is the co-director of this brain and spinal injury at the Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital. He's a professor of neurosurgical research and surgery in Weill Institute for Neurosciences at UCSF. And, his long and outstanding career has focused on the mechanistic neuroscience implications for large-scale clinical data science and precision medicine approaches towards a traumatic brain and spinal cord injury. He's really been a leader in the space of data sharing, in particular as he directs the Open Data Commons for both traumatic brain injury and spinal cord injury, and has really worked with major institutions, the NIH, DoD, and other foundations to lead the efforts in data sharing and integration for our community. So we're delighted to have you here, Adam, and you're ably supported by Abel, who is an assistant professor at the School of Public Health Sciences at the University of Waterloo in Canada. Abel is an outstanding young investigator who is an MSc in biostatistics and bioinformatics. He brings a lot of skills in neuroscience and bioinformatics, and his new lab, this health data-driven lab, really is at the frontiers of trying to investigate data science approaches towards brain and spinal cord injury research. So we're really grateful to have you both here to share your experience and what you've been doing for these past few years in leading the field forward for fair data sharing. And I hope this conversation will allow an update for us members, but also stimulate the conversations that we need to do both at the preclinical side and the translational side to improve data sharing for the neurotrauma field. So Adam, when you're ready, take it away.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you very much, David, for the kind intro, and thanks to the InTBIR team for inviting us. So as David mentioned, today I'm going to be talking about data sharing and machine intelligence for neurotrauma. Abel, I just kind of threw this together. You're going to recognize most of this, but if I say something that is incorrect, please jump in. So the disclosures here are that I'm PI or co-I on a bunch of federal grants and some nonprofit foundations. I also do some data science consulting and have some industry collaborations that are in kind. The premise of the talk today is that TBI is complex. I'm going to be trying to focus on TBI. I do both SCI and TBI, so I'll occasionally lapse into spinal cord injury, but the major focus is traumatic brain injury. So TBI is complex. We have over 100 trillion synapses in the human brain, and you superimpose upon this intrinsic complexity a bunch of heterogeneous injuries that develop over time. And of course, it's going to be really chaotic and hard to categorize and to predict outcome. And in deep sort of future years, people will develop increased dementia risk potentially after traumatic brain injury. So it's a very, very complicated situation. And clinically, historically, we haven't done a very good job of managing this complexity. The current state of the art for TBI classification is this trichotomization of mild, moderate, and severe TBI. There's going to be soon an update to this with a more sophisticated classification and characterization scheme, but ultimately, this type of simplification is not going to capture the disease with sufficient fidelity to predict outcome and help drive targeted therapies. On the preclinical side, we almost have the opposite problem. We have gazillions of tiny measures of biofunction. If you look in the literature, there will be all these multi-panel figures where some things go up and other things go down, and then people will sometimes do something wild. They'll like correlate them and try to understand the relationship. And ultimately, we don't do a very good job of managing this complexity in such a way that you can stand back, squint your eyes, and understand the disease. So today, what we're going to be focusing on is how we can do a better job of managing our data in such a way that we can put it in databases, that we can develop advanced query capabilities, and ultimately be able to drive graphical programming, statistical analysis, and make data sets themselves AI ready so that we can better navigate the complexity of the disease. Of course, the major bottleneck here currently is this poor victim of big data that has to do the data entry and data curation. So this is a bit of a hurdle right now. And it's actually sort of a microcosm of the bigger problem in biomedicine, in that biomedicine historically has not been a data science. If you look at the number of data sets in the biomedical field plotted against data size, you actually reach the conclusion that very little of our data is organized big data. And most of the data that is collected in the field is modestly sized data and a great many heterogeneous data sets. And this is known as the long tail of the data distribution here. This is where most of the data resides. It's not really organized. And at a certain point, you reach the literature limit, and beyond this, you have unpublished and dark data. These are the data that are small, heterogeneous, and don't appear in the published literature. We now know from meta-analyses that this dark data accounts for somewhere between 65 and 85% of the data that's collected by the biomedical research enterprise. And worldwide, this has some interesting economics because we collect about $300 billion in biomedical research per year as humans. And so you could reach this crazy conclusion that about $200 billion of the biomedical research data collection investment is collected, the data are semi-curated, and they're placed in a file drawer. So we're spending about $200 billion a year to put data in file drawers or in hard drives in a semi-organized way that really serves no obvious purpose. So that's problematic when we're talking about waste in biomedicine. It's also problematic when we talk about statistics because it means that only a minority of the data ends up in the published literature. And you could ask yourself, what is it about that minority of data why does it end up getting published? And a bunch of biostatisticians have pointed out that really we tend to publish those things that confirm our pre-existing hypotheses about the world. That is known as a confirmation bias. And we reject data that does not confirm our hypotheses. The consequence of this is that really the published literature is so highly cherry-picked that it's mostly false. What they mean by this is that most of the inferences that are reported in the published literature have a less than 50% chance of being independently replicated. And this has been demonstrated a number of times, which is, of course, problematic when we try to go to lawmakers and ask for more money because they say, research is unreliable, science is not as self-correcting as it should be. And this kind of thinking led the NIH in the United States to propose better reporting standards, more transparency to improve the predictive value of preclinical research. And there's this term rigor and reproducibility that all of us in the United States have to deal with on all of our grants. We have to talk about what we're doing to make our data more rigorous and reproducible. And I don't really think any of this is purposeful. I don't think it's anyone's fault, but I do think it's sort of an artifact of the way that we disseminate knowledge in science. If you think about what we do as scientists, most of our time is spent developing these really great protocols, collecting enormous amounts of data, but we don't get credit for that. We only get credit for taking all that data and somehow mashing it down into our 10-page Nature paper, right? So we get credit for selectively reporting from hundreds of thousands of pages of data down to those beautiful bits of data that help us tell a nice narrative story. And so, of course, when you do this, you're losing information and the data ends up being highly selected. So in other words, we have a data dissemination technology in biomedicine. Currently, it's just a really, really old and inefficient one based on the scientific paper. And that's a 17th century technology. So this is the first scientific paper that was published in English in 1665. It had no data in it. But it did have dialogue about data, it had stories about data, it had summaries of data. And last week, if you opened PubMed and you looked at literature, you'd notice that almost all the literature in science has no data in it. It has summaries of data, it has means, it has standard deviations, it has statistics about data, but the data themselves are not in the literature. So this leads us to need to develop a 21st century solution to data dissemination beyond the scientific paper. And this led NIH and a former president in 2013 to mandate that all federal funders in the United States need to compel their researchers to share their data. And they gave them 10 years to develop their tools for sharing data. So the National Academies of Sciences in the US had a series of workshops. I participated in these, looking at the cost for sharing data, the cloud infrastructures that could be brought to bear, and the culture change requirements for sharing data. And this culminated in this final policy for data management and sharing in the United States by the NIH that came out in January 2023. So we're just now like a year and a half past this, 2 years past this, I guess. And it's only just now starting to bite. Ultimately, the new mandate is that all data for every funded project needs to be made fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So the data sets themselves need to be viewed as primary work products of science, not just papers, but the data set needs to be a primary work product. So NIH has developed this scientific data sharing sort of institute called the Office of Data Science Strategy. They maintain a list of the ecosystems that are considered blessed ecosystems for sharing data by NIH. You can go to this website and you get this search field. I'm going to search for traumatic brain injury. And you see that there's really two blessed repositories. The first is the Federal Interagency Traumatic Brain Injury Research Informatics System, or FITBIR. This is not open to open data submission. It's basically designed for secure data collection and data sharing. It requires that an institutional signing authority sign off on data sharing with FITBIR. There's also not an open timeframe for data deposit. The other ecosystem is this thing called the Open Data Commons for Traumatic Brain Injury, which is open. That is, it'll take almost any data as long as it's formatted properly, and the data can be uploaded at any time. So this one really focuses on preclinical data and de-identified clinical data. This one is only for identified clinical data, like HIPAA compliance. I'd also point out that this Open Data Commons for TBI is the ecosystem that Abel and I developed. So I have a little bit of a conflict of interest in advertising this here. This is what the ODC TBI web portal looks like. Any one of you can go there right now. You can register. It's free. You can set up a lab to manage your data. It's free. As of this morning, we had 122 labs that have been registered. 261 data sets have been uploaded, and 28 have been pushed all the way to be public, citable data sets. We also, since we are the NIH-approved repository for TBI, we have these NIH-approved data management and sharing plans that you can download. If you submit a grant in the US, you're required to attach one of these, and a lot of people don't know how to develop these. We've been told by NIH if people use these templates, they will be approved. So we recommend that you do that. In addition, we post all those 28 published DOIs under this Explore Public Data link. So I click here, you get this list of all these data sets. I'm going to search for Track TBI, which is a clinical exercise, and you end up with this data set. I'm going to click into it. You end up with this page that is the landing page for this data set. This is the publication. This thing is forever. It's backed up by libraries and exists on the internet forever. Just like a paper, the data set has a it has a citation, and this makes the data citable. In addition, the data are released on a CC BY license. That's an attribution license, just like an open access paper. So the idea is that anyone can reuse this data for any purpose, but when they do so, they have to say, I got my data from Nielsen et al. 2023, just like a paper. So we've had quite a bit of uptake of the Open Data Commons for TBI. Every country in the world has regular web visits. In the United States, of course, we have lots of uptake because it's a mandate. In Canada, we have lots of use because Abel's there. And we're promoting it in North America very heavily. So the way this system is set up is that it's centered around the concept of a lab. So a PI of a lab establishes a private space in the Open Data Commons. That's where the data are delivered. And then the PI, once the data sets are up and have been annotated, they can decide whether to share it with other verified laboratories or whether they want to push it all the way to publication, like publishing a paper. When they click Request DOI, that kicks off an editorial review process, much like submitting a paper, except it's a whole lot faster. It's, a week or two and you have the whole thing done. So the way these landing pages work is if you scroll down, you'll see that we have links to the originating publication. So this is associated with a scientific paper. And then you can link to other data sets that are related, protocols, and other resources. Okay, so what I want to do for the last little bit of the talk is answer this question that a lot of people ask us. They say, okay, I have to share data, so what? I mean, I'm doing this because I have to, but what good does it do? How do we make use of these data? So the nice thing about having data in an ecosystem like the Open Data Commons is that it's structured in such a way that it's ready for machine intelligence and AI tools. So that allows us to very rapidly iterate on machine intelligence to drive discovery. One example of this is this paper in Nature Communications from 2015 that Jessica Nielsen and our team went after. She used pre-existing data sets from spinal cord injury and traumatic brain injury to discover new things. In spinal cord injury, she discovered some cardiophysiology stuff that is now transforming the way that spinal cord injury is treated in the acute phase. In addition, there were some insights about the relationship between TBI and spinal cord injury that were kind of interesting and are driving ongoing research. In addition, some of this work has been picked up in the news by Nature Medicine as examples of precision medicine, the way that you could actually select specific doses or specific drugs for particular patients using artificial intelligence. And one example of this kind of thing is this paper that was from the Track TBI pilot, where we basically looked at the full set of data from the Track TBI consortium and tried to understand where individual patients fall in the syndrome space of TBI. So here we have the Glasgow Coma score plotted against neurocognitive function, and these little dots would be individual patients. So the idea is you can actually look at how these two things relate by plotting an individual subject and their unique location in this two variable space or bivariate space. You can do this in a 3 variable, 4 variable, or 9,000 variable space, a multivariate space, and the math is basically the same. You can also do this across multiple data layers, and if you can track the same individual across the data layers, then it allows you to use these manifold learning tools, machine learning tools that allow you to understand what it means to be a member of a group in a multidimensional way so that you can cluster individuals in multiple dimensions simultaneously. And to navigate this, there are these tools such as topological data analysis, where you can summarize all of this data as nodes that represent clusters of subjects that are similar. And when there are clusters or groups of patients that overlap, there will be an edge formed. So when we apply this algorithm to the Track TBI data, we end up with this sort of Rorschach test. It's an ink blot. Abel, what do you see here? I'm just curious.
A butterfly, I will say.
Yeah, it's a butterfly for sure. Yeah.
Spinal cord injury.
Oh yeah, except it's not. It's traumatic brain injury, unfortunately. So just to show you what we're looking at here, I'm going to zoom in on this little section. So this is, each one of these nodes is a cluster of patients that are viewed as similar. And every time there's an edge or a line between the nodes, that means that there's at least one patient in common across these groups. There's multiple different ways to group people. So when you deploy this algorithm on a large scale, you end up with this smudge. And then the question is, what does it mean? So to answer that, you can paint it by variables of interest. So here we painted it by CT positivity, meaning you have lesions that are detectable on the CT. That's in red. If you don't have any lesions detectable by CT, that's in blue. I just want to call your attention to this little island of individuals here. You notice that a subset of those individuals that did not have a CT lesion did have MRI lesions. So this observation led to the first ever biomarker for traumatic brain injury that passed FDA biomarker qualification. That's T2 star weighted MRI imaging. The idea here is that MRI has higher resolution than CT. In addition, we noticed that these same groups of individuals had degeneration of function over time. Between 3 and 6 months post-injury, they actually got worse. In addition, they tended to have high rates of post-traumatic stress disorder. And when we did supervised machine learning and asked, like, what are some predictors of this group, we found that there was a genetic single nucleotide polymorphism that was associated with this sort of phenotype of PTSD positivity, mild injuries, and degeneration of function. So then that led us to this thought experiment. If you came in to the ED and all we knew about this patient is that they did not have a brain lesion, but they had a story that looked like it could be a traumatic brain injury, and you could very rapidly genotype them, could you predict their long-term outcome? And the answer to that seemed to be yes. So with just 2 pieces of information, you could actually predict whether they're going to show degeneration of function. Just a thought experiment, but the same kind of thing could be done with other biomarkers. Building on this work, we've taken the same data set and we've sent it over to some of the fastest supercomputers in the world. This one is at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs and is led by Chris Bouchard. And here the idea was to take the totality of all the intake features and then run it against the totality of all outcome features simultaneously and see if you could actually predict individual patient location. And what we found here is that you could take all intake features, come up with a very specific type of regression, a canonical regression analysis, and then it would predict all of the weighted outcomes, and you could account for 82% of the total variance in traumatic brain injury. We could use other kinds of methods to look at all the data and also take into account the missing data patterns. And here we found that the full collection of input data reduces the uncertainty of outcomes when you take all of the information as one group and you have basically unlimited supercomputing power. In addition, that guy, Abel, has used the open data that we have access to drive new innovations in software. So we developed this package, the Syndromics package, that allows people to do principal component analysis in a graphically pleasing way that people find easy to interpret. And we could even do permutation tests to test the robustness of these effects. And all of this was enabled by access to open data. You can notice here that this is, again, that track TBI data. So to sort of close out the talk, I've shown you guys that we have a potential for a new type of paper in the future. And the question is, what kind of paper would this be? What does the paper of the future look like? Well, already we're seeing that publishers are starting to enforce data sharing. People come to us all the time and say, my data needs to get a DOI immediately because Nature will not release our paper from embargo until we provide a DOI for our data set. So it's already the case that the peer-reviewed paper is associated with data sets that are citable. There's also discussion of adding protocols, model cards, and analysis code, all of these as citable units that sort of relate to the peer-reviewed paper. In addition, you can imagine that there will be a knowledge layer that people will add in the future using large language models, ChatGPT, and things of that sort. And all of this will enable more sophisticated search and drive more rapid insights, novel hypotheses, new mechanisms, biomarkers, and therapies. So the paper of the future is not one thing. It is this constellation of related citable units. So to realize this, all of you who publish need to get in the habit of putting your data into an ecosystem like the Open Data Commons, adding the citation to that data to the paper. So this is an example. For the detailed data for each individual subject, the data have been deposited in the Open Data Commons. And here's this DOI that is forever. So in the end, every time you publish something, you'll have the data, and then you'll have the paper, and then these two cross-reference each other. And then you can even have multiple papers that are derived from the same data set. So this leads to a virtuous cycle of citation and credit, and you get, a lot more credit for your work. You get credit not only for your ability to conjure a story, but also for your ability to collect rigorous data, which I think is an important transformation. So I'll close there. These are the places that I work currently, and I need to plug all the brilliant young people I work with. And Abel, I guess you're sort of not so much of a young guy anymore, but
Not younger. No, not young. No.
and we can
Oh,
take questions.
yeah, wonderful, Adam. Thank you so much. It was a great overview of your concept and the ideas that's going on here. Maybe I'll start. Well, how has it been? You know, in the US, you're mandated to do this now. So how's the uptake been, and how can you encourage people, you know, in other places to participate? You know, I think you've demonstrated value here, but what are the opportunities for us and the pipeline to enter and join you in that effort? Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the uptake's been pretty good, especially in spinal cord injury, because in spinal cord injury, there's only one ecosystem that's listed. It's just the Open Data Commons for spinal cord injury. And we have all the major nonprofit funders endorsing it and Journal Neurotrauma endorsing it. So there's been uptake in that way. Getting Europe to contribute, this is I know you guys have your own concerns. So there's the GDPR, but then you also have your own EU specific data sharing mandates. But if the data are de-identified and shareable, therefore, there's nothing that would prevent you from being able to put it into this ecosystem. It's free. You can, all of you today can sign up and just fiddle around with it and see if you like it. Our goal was to try to make it as user-friendly as possible. So I think it's been going pretty well. Abel, what's your view on this?
Yeah, I will agree. I think we're still early on to see what's been the effect of the mandates, because the way that the mandates are working is that by the end of the grant, people needs to put those data sets up if they have in their proposal have suggested the ODC as place, then they will be mandated to put that, and it's going to be policed by basically the funding agencies. That's going to be like in 2 or 3 years from now, once those grants, the first ones that were put on, will finalize. And so we are building up capacity and predicting that this is going to happen rather, all at once, when everyone needs to put their progress reports in the future. So I think that's going to come. It will be great to have more European colleagues using this for sure. It's been, as you saw in the maps, it's been heavily on the US market just because it started in the US and it's been advertised in the US and because the mandates. But I will say, we don't need to wait for mandates to be useful, I guess, for everyone. So one of the things that I always like to point out is that it's been shown that sharing your data increase the number of citations of your papers and increase the number of opportunities for collaborations. And now universities are starting to value those extra work products for promotions and things like that. So I think there is an incentive, an intrinsic incentive and advantage of doing this. It creates reputation, good reputation in your own fields, because you're transparent, you're providing, you're open to be, I guess, scrutinized and so on. So I think there is a lot of advantages for anyone beyond having some mandates for that.
I would just point out ORCIDs. Is everyone familiar with the concept of ORCIDs? Yeah. So ORCIDs automatically scrape from the ODCs. So every time we publish a data set, it automatically ends up in our ORCID as a creative work product, in the same, right under the same place where the papers exist. Yeah.
It also drives, so when I mentioned it drives citation, it also drives citation in your papers, because then people, when they're going to, if they cite the data set, they are only not going to cite the data set. They're going to cite, where the context of that data comes from. And so they're going to be citing the papers. I got, collaboration requests from people because they saw my data release. And so I think it brings a lot of potential for building the community around good research practices.
Great. Thank you. Doug, you want to have?
Yeah, so my father-in-law had an expression, there's an ass for every seat. And, thank God there are people like you who like to do this because people like me could never do it. And so we really need that. I'm not looking for a loan, by the way. I'm just, I mean, it's just a really important thing. I don't know anybody who would disagree. It's just, it has to be done. And I think it's actually past due, right? And we all need this. But let me be devil's advocate. Everybody's getting their 23andMe or Ancestry or whatever, or just in research getting sequences done, and having these data sets and AI and a bunch of, and let's just say there's some malevolent types out there who are looking to identify people. How do you guarantee in those cases that somebody can't actually figure it out?
Yeah. Well, first off, that's why FitBeer exists, because FitBeer is not open really. FitBeer is for the identified data. So the ODCs specialize in preclinical, so rats and mice. I mean, they might be able to discover the genetics of a Sprague dolly and identify it as a white rat, but we also take de-identified data. Doug, you do point out a major issue here with all of the data that is being shared. Is it possible to crosswalk multiple data sets and start to snap them together? And the way this has already been done to us as consumers, right? Like, by the way, Amazon, Netflix, Uber know way more about us than we would ever want them to, right? So we're already maximally identified in the world, but our goal with the Open Data Commons is to only take de-identified data and to make it actually somewhat difficult for people to sort of build a profile of Doug Smith, the data object who has TBI.
Yeah, I think if we look at the de-identification laws, like privacy laws for data sharing, clinical data sharing across different countries in the world, what we see is basically a tendency to balance the benefit of having that data versus the risk, because there is an understanding now in data sharing that there is no such thing as fully de-identified data, that you don't have the capacity. Basically, like if you have, I think there's been research in the US, for instance, that with 15 like demographic variables, you can identify 99% of the people in the US, right? So it's impossible to protect against that. The rules and the laws and the best practices now are based on minimizing that risk. And so if someone wants to do that re-identification, needs to go like really sophisticated to be able to do it. But there are advantages of sharing data. And the other point of this is that we should consider what are the opinions of those that we are sharing the data from. And in the spinal cord injury research field, for instance, there's been surveys asking people with lived experience, and like 99% of them say like, share my data, I don't care. What I care is that you use that data for something meaningful. And so, I think we try to sort of like balance that. Obviously, we follow the laws with the ODCs, but there is no zero risk, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah. One other piece, Abel, I'm going to plug your efforts. There are guaranteed privacy preserving technologies now that are based on essentially these cryptographic hashes. So you can have databases even on different continents, and you have this like federated machine learning ecosystem that can build these cohorts virtually, and there's no way you could re-identify individuals because you never gain access to the data. So there are solutions. The real question is, how much is the juice worth the squeeze? Because some of that stuff is very expensive to put in place. Yeah. Does that answer the question, Doug?
Yeah, and it all comes back to Kevin Bacon. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's right. It's just Yeah, 15 degrees of Kevin Bacon. I think that's the expression. Yeah.
I'm curious about, you mentioned something about the review process for your ODC TBI or your ODC SCI. Who's doing this? Is that you, Adam and Abel, or is this how is this operationalized? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's not me. Just like in scientific publishing, there's always some sucker who wants to be an editor.
Yeah.
In our case, it was Kareem Fawad was like, I want to be the editor unless Adam wants to be an editor. And I was like, oh, well, I will self-sacrificially allow you to be the editor, Kareem. And Marianne Martone is the editor of the ODC TBI.
Okay.
I am not. It's just not my.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm not.
Yeah, and so we do have a team of people. There is a quote unquote like editorial review and there is a technical review.
Right.
So we have a group of people doing the technical review just to make sure that we follow the standards for calling the data fair.
Yeah.
And then the editorial review is by some volunteers that have been appointed by the editorial chair to be part of the review board. And so two reviewers get the data set, they make sure that complies with the scope of the ODCs, which you will imagine is relatively open, if it's a spinal cord injury or TBI, it's just like a TBI data set. And then once that's approved, we just go through the technical review. We have built tools for automatic processing of those technical reviews, so it's really quite straightforward. And usually, as Adam said, like in a week or two, you should have, unless there is like, your data set is a big mess and you need to go back and like redo it, then we provide some consulting help on that process.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Elisa?
Yeah, I have a curiosity. Maybe I missed it, but once the data are reviewed, can they be updated? So, I mean, it is thought to be a sort of a living system, or in case there is a part B, you need a new data set.
Yeah. So once there's a DOI, it is published in the same sense that a paper is published.
Okay.
If the data need to be updated, then that would be similar to issuing an erratum, or a correction. However, if you do like another curation of the data, that could be another work product. There's this concept in sort of data stewardship known as derivative work products. So you can have your first data set, which was curated for this specific purpose. And then later you develop, new variables or recode variables for a different specific purpose. That's a new data set with a new citation. And in the provenance, you can say this is derived from this other data set. And that's totally okay because of the CC BY license. You just have to do the attribution. You have to say this came from this other thing. It's derived from this other thing.
I suppose I'd be curious to hear about, you're in the US space. So what do you need from the world community to engage in this? What are the opportunities? Like there's an education piece, obviously, clearly. We need to understand what this is and the value of it and the potential. But you need people to participate, to submit their data set. So what are you looking for so we can all move forward?
So Abel's not in the US. So Abel, as a Commonwealth citizen and a European passport holder, what do you want?
I mean, I think we're still in the phase of having more users. So I will say, like, the first thing we may need is spreading the word and, like encouraging, like if you go out to a conference, for instance, just encouraging everyone to register and have more users in the ODC, because the more visibility that we have, the more we are going to be known, so like here is a place for the spinal cord injury or the TBI field to put data. I think one of the issues that comes from education is this seemingly fight with the general use repository. So one of the things that we are seeing now is that there are repositories out there that are what we call general use repositories. So they will take any data set in any format and they will now guarantee that like a level of quality and the standards for like the field of TBI, but they will just accept it and generate a DOI. And I think we need to make emphasis that this is being created by the community, by the TBI community, by researchers in the TBI community, and that therefore it's being put there for the benefit of the community. And so we just need to, spread that in the US, sorry, in Europe. I've been in the US for too long, I guess, but in Europe, and beyond, but spread the word. I mean, I guess if anyone in Europe wants to be part of the review board, that will be another way to contribute to this. I think we're always open to have more people on those review boards.
Yeah.
The spinal cord injury has a community board. I think that can also potentially open more contributions from Europe. We do have a few European colleagues, but we may need more, I guess. And just to clarify, the Odyssey, SCI, and TBI are sister, like it's the same backend system. It's designed by the same people, the same engineers, and managed by the same group of people. So in that sense, there is no need to distinguish between those.
I think both Elise and I are involved in European Neurotrauma organization. I think Nick Marklund is also on the call. He also, so there are working groups in that organization that could and should know about this effort and contribute to that effort. I know we know about it because of NIH funding, because we're mandated through a collaboration to do this. But I imagine many European and international researchers don't know so much about this just yet. So it's really an information sharing piece that's important here.
Yeah, I agree with that, David. Another thing very concretely that you could do is if you go and sign up and discover that you dislike things about it, click this contact the help desk on the page where you are. You say, I really hate this feature. Because one of the advantages of us at our current stage, we're small, we're like a startup, is the way to think about us. We can actually do things that would make it more user-friendly and maybe better for folks in Europe, if you just share with us what you want.
Yeah, thank you.
Another couple of thoughts here is something I do, for instance, when I teach my data science classes and I teach about data sharing. I provide students with, the example of the Odyssey, and some of them have registered just to download data sets for practice. So if you have students in your lab that say like, I want to do a, research question on this and that, take a look and see if there is a data set already available, because maybe you save some time in using someone else's data that you can answer your questions rather than collecting your own data. And that's been quite effective for students, especially for like undergrad or master students that don't have necessarily all the time in the world to do experiments.
That's a really good point, Abel. And also, part of the reason we set this up around labs so that, the only way you can submit a data set is to set up a lab, and that's a private space. So we had some PIs at an early workshop who said, you know what, I don't care about altruism. I don't care about sharing data. I don't care about looking at other people's data. I care about being able to find my own data after the postdoc leaves. So if you could build this around a lab that I control, then that would be good for me as a PI, because I'll just make my people upload data sets and I can actually watch their progress as the PI of the lab. So you can also use it as an active data management system without ever publishing DOIs. That's why we have these 261 data sets. Most of those are data sets that are in people's labs. We have no access to it. It's like their little private fiefdom.
Yeah. Great. Any other questions or queries from the group about this effort? No?
I do have a question, I guess, for the rest of the group, if I'm allowed. So, what's the mandates that you guys have in different jurisdictions about data sharing? Because I got lost now in different laws and so on. Like, for instance, in Europe, with European grants, is that up to each country in the European Union? Is there a European, so like general mandate?
Elisa?
Yeah, I think that is even more complicated than this because within a single country, you may have different requirements depending on the institute. For instance, we are part of a group of institutes that are recognized by the Ministry of Health as a center of excellence. And in order to fulfill this requirement, we are obliged to update the full data set each time we publish as first or last author from data driven, not uniquely, but mostly from our institute. And this is typically done via a biorepository that is, European. So, but in theory, we could also do it from. We could also take advantage of a different biorepository. So, yeah.
I mean, we can do mirroring as well. We can say this is a version of a data set that's somewhere else, as long as we are just clear about the provenance.
Yeah, and the license allows for that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about, at least in the preclinical space, about regulatory guidance with regard to data sharing in Europe. I know in GDPR is it's a different thing for clinical research, but for preclinical research, I'm not aware of, at least in Ireland, I'm not aware of major things that we need to follow. But obviously, as scientists, we want to keep the highest standards, and I think we're looking towards the US about what you are doing, and you're leading the way there. So it's a matter of joining up the effort, and I think it's been well validated, and you've been testing it out, and checking it through. So I think that's the effort, and it sounds like we just need more and more people to participate in that effort, and open up and see the value of it. And I think that's what you're showing here, Adam, is that potential of this data share and for the discovery, for the validation, for all these different aspects, and the value in the units of publication that you're describing. So that's awesome.
Great. So Abel, next time you're home, you have to go on a speaking tour to.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, that'll be fantastic. Okay. Well, look, I'm going to close up here, but I want to thank Adam and Abel again once for your time. I really appreciate the efforts that you've been doing in the US to lead this field for both brain and spinal cord injury. I think it's been really helpful for us. We're going to share this webinar widely because I think it's not only useful for the preclinical scientists, but for the clinical researchers in the network here to really understand where this is and where it's going and your goals. And I know Elisa and I have individual labs set up on ODC TBI, but I certainly haven't been putting in the data just yet. So I need to get at that task, and I'll do that in the morning. But honestly, thanks for your efforts here, and thanks for taking the time to educate us all about this important effort. So thank you.
Well, thank you guys very much for having us.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye. Ciao.